It's now 5:30, so we're going to begin the Community Police Review Board. We have an announcement that's a new one that we're going to be making at the beginning, I guess, almost all of, at least for us, it's going to work this way. Before proceeding, I'd like to provide the board members some guidance on how to use technology at the dais. To speak, you need to use the mics and touch the button actively. Wait for your turn to speak. And isn't there something else you wanted me to say in it? Okay. Clerk, call the roll, please.
Member Beasley Day. Member Bryan.
Present.
Member Byrd.
Present.
Member Christensen.
Present.
Member Damerel. Member Grant. Member Smith.
Present.
Member Solario.
Here.
And Chairman Hahn.
Here. Yes.
Chairman Hahn, Board Member Beasley Day is absent this evening. We would like to ask the board to consider her request for an excused absence, which meets our criteria for the granting of an excused absence. So at this time, we ask for a motion from the board to grant her an excused absence.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Anybody have a declaration of conflict of interest? Now we go to public comment, and anybody would like to come and speak for 3 minutes on anything that's not on the agenda, please come forward now.
Don't start it yet. The clock. I'm rushing. I thought you guys started at 5. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sebastian Jones. Wendy, glad to see you. God bless you. We can't be up under the weather like me, but God is good. Well, what I bring to this board, I don't think you guys, I don't know if you're Modesto or all departments, but I had an incident that occurred on 8/21. I was pulled over. Well, wasn't pulled over. I was pretty much jacked. I was going approximately about 9:30, headed on on a scenic going west, and they did have a little barricade there, but I seen other cars go around. Well, I figure I'll go around too. But I had an officer run up to me and he had the flashlight in my eye. It blinded me. So I just stopped and rolled down my window. And he said, "Get moving." Then he broke my mirror. He took his flashlight in an ignorant way and hit my mirror. Well, hell, I thought he had shot off a gun. So I just stayed there and I got my thoughts together and I got out. And I had my hands like this. And I asked him what was the problem. And he rushed me, messed up both of my, there's a technique they use. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to find out. When they grab you, they twist his back some kind of way. I had a brace on it for about 3 weeks, and it still hurt if I pick up a grocery bag. But I asked the officer, "Why did you break my mirror?" And then he just kept pushing me back. I told him I wasn't resisting. I guess I looked like a thug that day because I had my little work clothes on when I work on my cars. Then there was another white cop, didn't even know nothing. He rushed up, "You're going to jail." And I looked at him, I said, "Well, let's go." And I said, "You don't even know what happened." So them two got together and then they sent for a third officer to watch me. They had me handcuffed. And I asked him, would he please loosen the handcuff? And I got pictures you can't see right now, but it swole my hand up. And the nice cop, he loosened them up for me while them two clowns down there trying to figure out is I'm going to go to jail. And then after about 30 minutes, I told the other police officer, I said, can they make up their mind for me to go to jail or what? So they finally came up, and the other cop whispered something in his ear. He said, "Your name's Sebastian?" Yeah. And then he said, "Well, you want to listen to me?" I said, "Go ahead." He said, "Well, we had him at gunpoint, and you go around." I said, "Well, sir, if you had anything at gunpoint, you would have had an officer right there on scenic stopping me, and you'd have shut down the eastbound traffic. But the eastbound traffic was going through, and the other traffic going through, I feel go around. We do that all the time. Fire truck, police out. We just going around. Even though I might have been wrong, but I figure, well, hell, two other cars went around. Hell, I did the same thing. But I got busted. But when I explained it to him, what I observed, it was all over. The people were sitting in their car, cranked up, and you guys just feeling around. So what are you talking about? You had him at gunpoint. When you got something at gunpoint, you're gonna shut down all lanes. A bullet don't have a name, and you're gonna have somebody post it to make sure nobody comes or interfere. Matter of fact, you're gonna take it all the way to coffee, because we're right there by the restaurant. Then you should have shut it down at coffee if you got somebody at gunpoint and the eastbound on scenic. They'd have shut that down. But traffic was flowing. But they finally gave me a ticket, and it says going on the wrong side of the road. The officer didn't even know there's a middle lane there. I wasn't in the eastbound lane. I was in the middle lane if you're on scenic and you're getting ready to make that turn, that left turn on coffee. You can call that a middle lane or whatever. So he said I was going on the wrong side of the road, and he took the handcuff. I said, well, I wanted to go to jail. I did. I really did want to go to jail.
Can you, we're way over time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I get to talking.
No, if you need
But I
to,
thought I'd just bring it to the attention as another African American being mistreated. And do he deserve to get his right window knocked out? See, y'all talking about training these officers. He was hyped. And I looked at him, man, basically tell him, slow down. It ain't that serious.
if
But
you,
anyway, I made my statement,
okay,
and I thought I'd bring it to this board. I didn't know which side, if you're Modesto sheriff or whatever. Well, I think we need one on the sheriff. If the sheriff don't have one, then they need one. Because the old boy was really ruthless to an African American. And I don't deserve. Almost had me in tears. But I stood my ground. And the other officer, I really want his name None of them wouldn't give me no card. You can't read his ticket name. Barely can get his number. But anyway, I went down there to try to figure out what I can do.
Okay,
So I'm still seeking
good.
because my hands are all still. I can't pick up grocery bag too much. But anyway, I thought I'll just wait to this day and bring it to the attention. May God bless you. And this is what we should do
Right.
to give you eyes and ears when you're not there. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Okay, seeing none. You need to approve the minutes from the last meeting on August 21st. Everybody have a chance to look at them, and so if everybody's okay with it, do we have a motion?
I like them.
You can do it. You don't.
I'd like to make a motion to. Check. I'd like to make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we have no new business. We got three items tonight.
Ron? I pushed this button. I don't know if it came up or not. I wanted to ask a question of Sebastian. Sir, did you file a complaint with the police department?
Not at this time, but that's on my agenda. You gotta understand I'm fighting cancer.
Yes, sir.
Angel.
Yes, sir. I understand.
I have to take it one day at a time. But that's on my books.
Yeah, I would recommend that you initiate a complaint and, would ask the department to follow up on that and investigate the circumstances.
Yeah, that's on my books. Don't worry, Mr. Jones, don't give in. So it was just excessive force and demeanor that we don't need to be treated because of my color. I want that other guy that really made that statement. Send him to jail. Hell, you don't even know what the hell happened. That's sad.
Right, we have independent auditors update.
There's an item on under
New business for you.
New business?
Yeah.
It says none on mine.
Consider.
I've got it outdated. Okay, yeah, we're gonna consider canceling next month's meeting. About half of us are gonna be gone to the national convention, and we were gonna talk about the collective bargaining. I kind of felt like we all need to be here for that, so requesting that we look at canceling next month's meeting.
Does it have to be open to the public?
Hmm?
Does the public have to make a comment?
Public have any comment on that? Nope. Seeing none, we can need a motion.
I'll make a motion that we cancel next month's meeting.
Excuse me, Brett, which members are going? I know I will be on vacation out
I'm-
of town, but which members are going to be?
I know myself and Latricia, and then I know there will be 2 city officials.
Yeah, it'll be myself. It'll be myself and Simi also, who usually clerks these meetings, and Lieutenant Kleiber will be attending as well.
Okay, so that's, and you're gonna be gone too, so. So I need a motion. I got a motion. I need a second so we can go.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Now it's the independent auditor's report.
Thank you, Chair Hawning, and good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. It's Steve Conley, independent police auditor, speaking to you remotely, obviously, and I'm happy to be on the agenda every month just to make sure and to check in. But I can also tell you it has been a quiet month for my office. Looking forward to the presentations on the rest of the agenda tonight, and I certainly hope everybody has a good experience at the NACOL conference next month, which I'm glad the city's going to be so well represented. So thank you. That's all from me.
Okay, bias,
Brad,
yes.
Steve, could you, I don't know if this is on or not. Steve, was there any follow-up? You were going to be meeting with MPD in the city, I thought, to look at the scope of what you might be able to do in response to the letter from the NAACP?
Yes, ma'am. So we have had those initial conversations, and I know the chief spoke to the issue a little bit at last month's meeting as well. The thought was that some of the presentations that you're going to be hearing tonight regarding bias-based policing and the Racial and Identity Profiling Act statistic data gathering, that those would help shape the board's knowledge and information about what's already being done, and then we'll kind of drill down from there, and hopefully by October or November be able to have a plan of action for moving forward.
Thank you.
I have a comment. Steve, I think that's good, but I also think that due to your level of experience, that you could be more helpful in pointing us in the right direction in terms of what type of information needs to be extracted so that we're not wasting a lot of time. And I don't see hiring university and spending a lot of money to do a study when we have experts like you and your firm. So I'd like to see you get a little more involved in directing us in the right direction of what we need to be looking for.
Well, I certainly appreciate the confidence that you have in our office and our level of experience. And yeah, I think that's fine. We would be happy. I know that the chief said he was certainly looking to get some input from you. And I would be happy if we want to agendize that for November, Scotty. I would be happy to share some ideas about approaches that the board could be taking or recommendations you could be making. Again, I'm happy to see if there is a tailored project that I could be actually doing through my office that is responsive to some of this, that is kind of within the scope of work and relates to our areas of expertise, to use your term, which basically is really about not so much the statistical analysis and the large scale data evaluation, but really looking at individual cases and then the department's review systems to see if we have any recommendations for improving their processes. So I think that by the time after next month's sabbatical, by the time we come back in November, I'll be happy to have some ideas for you and maybe a specific suggestion or recommendation about what my office could particularly be doing by way of an audit.
Yeah, because since that article, another article came out on September the 9th, that Modesto police arrest Black juveniles at over 4 times their population rate. And then again, we just heard from Mr. Sebastian about another incident. And so I think that based on what I read about your job description and things like that, I really think that you could be very helpful in.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, I saw that article too. I know that it is an issue that is very much on the minds of people in the city. The individual experience that Mr. Jones was talking about is obviously another avenue than part of what my office can be doing. If Mr. Jones were to file a complaint or the department were to do kind of a formal evaluation of some of the issues he was raising tonight, then my office would be able to take a look at that and kind of drill down into not only the officer's conduct, but also the department's response. So there are some potential avenues open to us, and it's just a question of figuring out the fit that makes the most sense in terms of efficiency and everything else.
Okay. So now we're going to have the bias-based policing training overview by Lieutenant Cliver. Sure.
So just in response, I don't want, a comment was made, public comment, and the little bit we've already looked into it. The citation was issued by the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Department. So, I want to make that comment clear that what was set up here at the dais tonight may not even be the Modesto Police Department. So I think that's just an example. It'd be careful of to jump to conclusions.
All right, good evening. Can you hear me okay? It's hard to tell from this end.
You get a little shorter.
I can try, or if someone doesn't mind holding it for me, that might help. Good evening. For those who don't know me, my name is Lieutenant Brian Kleiber from the Modesto Police Department. I work in the Internal Affairs Division. The first of my two presentations today is regarding bias-based policing training and what our officers experience through the academy and while they're working as officers. And just starting off, I want to make sure everyone understands too, this is really just an overview, basically, of the type of training that officers get, because pretty much everything that I'm going to mention here, unless if you're curious, I can tell you otherwise, but pretty much everything is actually publicly available, and you're more than welcome to look it up on the internet. It's not a secret. It's easily accessible for anyone who would like to find that. So, it's hard to read the corner here. Sorry. It's okay. I thought I was on the wrong page, but so when officers are in the academy, the post academy, they go through 42 separate what we call learning domains, and those learning domains each cover a separate topic, and then the officers, the future officers are tested on each topic and have to pass each test. So, two of the learning domains that occur within the post academy are related to bias-based policing. So the first of which is learning domain number 3. And again, this is one that's publicly accessible. You can find it at home. Just if you do a Google search for California Post Learning Domain 3, the entire thing is there for you. It's about 139 pages long, so fairly lengthy. But it's divided into 6 chapters, the first of which discusses community policing, and what that means is essentially an introduction to principal policing, discusses organizational and personal community policing, and the importance of promoting community partnerships. Those are the various partnerships in the community with community leaders, with churches, with schools, with those types of things. And then moving into problem solving and basically identifying for our future officers that this job is not just about enforcing the law, but it's about solving problems within the community. And then from there, it moves on to principal policing, which involves procedural justice and the importance of allowing people's voices to be heard, and showing neutrality and respect and trustworthiness with the community, and how the outcome is often more important than the end result when it comes to policing within our communities. It also discusses historical and current events, how those have affected perceptions of the law enforcement over the years, including going back to the Jim Crow era, the usage of police for enforcing segregation laws, and how that it still affects opinions to this day. And it's important for future officers to be aware of those things. Within this chapter is, again, principal policing. And this is where it kind of delves into implicit and explicit bias, what those mean, how those are formed, and how those can relate to principal policing and to making negative decisions as an officer. So it also discusses cultural competency, understanding the various cultures within the community that we serve. It goes into a little more detail about procedural justice, and then the legitimacy of the police department, and how events such as the one we just heard can take away from the legitimacy of a department when they occur to community members. And this is where it also goes into further historical events. So post learning domain 42 also relates to cultural diversity and discrimination. So this chapter, this learning domain
begins with recognizing diversity. It's essentially an introduction to the category or to the chapter talking about the various cultures that exist within California. It discusses prejudice and discrimination and how those can have negative effects on, again, the legitimacy of the police department and racial profiling as well. It talks about making effective law enforcement contacts within these communities, understanding how various differences within cultures can affect how folks perceive and interact with the police, and how it's important to recognize and respect those differences as well. It also discusses sexual orientation and gender identity, and I think our academy typically brings a member from our local Cal Pride office to talk to the recruits about this, but it discusses sexual orientation and gender identity, what the differences are between those things. This learning domain also covers hate crimes, which are covered under 422.6 of the Penal Code, and what exactly a hate crime is, what the elements of that crime are. And then it covers sexual harassment as well, which I think is relatively self-explanatory. So section 13519.4 of the California Penal Code became operable on January 1st of 2023. It provides a definition of racial profiling and a requirement for ongoing training for peace officers in California. One note is that training is only required every 5 years to meet the post mandate. Here in Modesto, we do training much more often than that. We actually attend some form of racial bias training every 2 years, whether that includes bias training specifically or diversity, equity, inclusion training as well. The video that is post-mandated, by the way, is also available online if anyone's interested in seeing it. It's about an hour and a half long, so it's relatively lengthy, but it's on YouTube, actually. And so again, if you do a Google search for the California Post bias-based policing training video, it'll come right up for you. MPD Policy 402 is what defines bias-based policing or improper profiling within our department, and it's essentially its purpose is to reinforce and match up with 13519.4 of the California Penal Code, and it's basically an inappropriate reliance on actual or perceived characteristics such as race, ethnicity, national origin, which includes limited English proficiency, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, economic status, age, cultural group, disability, or affiliation with any non-criminal group with protected characteristics as the basis for providing differing law enforcement services or enforcement. So this includes explicit and implicit biases, which is, I think we know, is conscious and unconscious beliefs or attitudes towards certain groups. So the purpose of this is to cover not only using race as a determining factor in making a stop of an individual, but also in making a decision as to where to proceed once an individual is stopped as well. And then one thing we've discussed earlier, I think about 8 or 9 months ago, is the cultural relations coaching series, which I think is specific really to just the Modesto Police Department. I haven't heard of it in any other departments that I know of, but it is facilitated by Michael Baldwin, who I think many in here know. It includes 10 sessions of 4-hour blocks. The first 2 sessions, the groups meet separately to discuss unconscious bias, sensitivity to cultural differences, how fear can affect decision-making and trauma. The next 8 sessions, the group meet together for discussions on personal history, role-playing, situational stimulation, tough and constant conversations. And those include what shapes us, what's brought us to this point in our lives, and systemic racism. To date, 87 of our officers have completed this course. So again, that's just an overview of what we experience with bias-based policing training, but I'd like to welcome any questions.
Anybody? I think so.
I have a question of you, Lieutenant Kleiber. The learning domain 3, chapter 4, principal policing, there's a item listed there as cultural competency. I'm assuming this is in your academy, is that correct?
Yes.
And who provides that training or that information?
I'm not sure who specifically within the academy provides it. I'm not sure.
So is there any community members that are involved in that, providing that information, or I'm not sure that they would be involved in the training, but at least giving a perspective about the different cultures that exist within our community.
Yeah, I don't know if we have any specific community members who do that. Like I know in regards to the gender identity, sexual orientation, there are, but I don't know about any other sections within the academy.
I think just a point of clarification is we don't have our own police academy. The San Luis County Sheriff's Office is one of the academies that we use, and the other academy we typically use is the San Joaquin County Delta College Academy. So those are the two academies that we send our police officer recruits to. So they aren't actually run by our agency, but obviously those are post-mandated domains. And I don't know, we can ask, but I don't know if they have community members involved or if these are taught by law enforcement instructors, I think is what you're asking, correct?
Correct. I mean, it just seems to me there would be value, you know, having a community perspective involved in that, as opposed to someone that's involved and ingrained in the law enforcement community. And not that they might do an adequate job, they certainly could, but I think it would lend more credibility if there were community members of the various ethnic groups and cultural groups within the community that would be involved in imparting that information to prospective officers.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, that's just a personal observation. I don't know whether it's legitimate or not.
I think it's very legitimate.
Yeah, and we can follow up and ask both those academies if they provide that type of instruction.
Thanks.
Nico's next.
I'm sorry.
Just a quick question. When did the city start doing the racial bias training every 2 years, or has that always been like that? Are you guys ever 5 years, like post mandate?
I don't know the specific date. I know that I believe it's been for quite a while, but I don't know the exact time frame.
So it's been,
Yeah, I don't have a date either, but it's been that way for a while.
okay.
Lieutenant Kleiber, you said that 87 officers have completed the class. How many officers are there?
We are authorized 211,
Okay.
but probably have on the books, not including academy recruits, probably around 180, 190.
Okay. Will they all be going through it? Is it mandatory or?
Yeah,
Just-
that is the goal, is ultimately get everybody through it. Obviously, there's always attrition, always new officers coming on, but we absolutely can, my direction is to continue to hold these classes. We hold, I think, anywhere from 2 to 3 per year, I want to say, is what we're typically running, at least 2 a year.
Right. I can tell you because I was, Mr. Grant and I were able to be part of the first class here. So I can tell you, just because I remember it began in May of 21. So in 3.5 years, we've been able to have 87 officers experience it.
That's the one you're talking about is Michael Baldwin.
Correct.
You know, from my perspective and just watch it from the outside and talking to some people that have been through that, their first reaction and after 2 or 3 weeks, the reaction is like night and day, because start seeing people in the room with very different lives, seeing each other as a person and starting to work together. That is probably more effective than all the training, with a chalkboard type thing that you could get, because you have to break down those barriers inside that you have by getting to know some folks that you have these biases against. So
Right. I mean, you kind of took the words out of my mouth, because, with post mandates, there are videos we have to watch, there are tests we have to take, those types of things, but those are never going to affect a person as personally as experiencing a class where you're sitting down and sharing some of your most intimate thoughts and experiences, positive and negative, with folks that you might not otherwise be communicating with, right? And so that's why we're trying to get so many officers through it, or every officer through it eventually, is because it's far more effective than watching a video and taking a test, right? There are things that we have to do as post-training, and then there's those that we do to go above and beyond that.
And I'll just echo that. I've gone to every class graduation of this class. I don't go through the class, so you'd have to speak to Board Member Grant or Lieutenant Kleiber or others, but I get the privilege of being there at the graduation ceremonies. I usually go for the first day and the last day, and I get to hear the testimonials from both community members and our officers, and it's pretty transformational. So not that training's important, training is important in all of these LD domains that we talk about, making sure that police officer recruits are starting their career out with a lot of this knowledge and this training. But it's really speaking to having personal conversations. And one of the things that why it takes us a while to get through it is you can't do this. In my conversations with Michael Baldwin, it's not effective having a class of 50 people and 50 community members. This is more small, intimate group settings. And so we cap it at a maximum of 15 officers and 15 community members. And so it takes a while to get people through it, but unanimously, I haven't heard one community member or officer who didn't say it wasn't a very, very beneficial training or course.
Yes.
And, would it be possible for those of us on the Community Police Review Board that want to participate in this, can we sign up for the next session? Or I realize there's a limit on how many people can participate, but I think it would be of value to me. I don't know about my fellow board members, but I would certainly like to participate in that.
I'd be happy to take that request to Michael and discuss it with him. If, I know he has certain parameters he likes to choose for the community members as well, and I don't know specifically how that would fit in. So I don't want to speak for him, but I'd be happy to let him know.
I'm sure we could sprinkle a few board members until we get everybody through it. I think that would be eye-opening.
Yeah. We have one that's been through it already, right? You did?
Yeah, it's a really good class. Everyone should take it, very much so. It very much teaches you about both sides of the coin, really. Especially when you're talking to a fellow police officer that may not think the same way you do. And a police officer talking to a citizen that may not think the same way they do is just very important, because it just brings people together and you start to understand what it takes to be a real police officer. So like in some cases, you may think like in certain instances, they're supposed to act a certain way or react a certain way. And then when you're placed in position, you're like, dang, I didn't know that. But then other side of the coin is like we had an example to where it was like a traffic stop, and how uncomfortable a cop was during the traffic stop, didn't even know that he was uncomfortable, or how like opposite way, how the citizen was very uncomfortable and the police officer didn't know that they were making them uncomfortable. So it's one of those really good classes that is very much a thing that should be done probably by every precinct there is, because it just brings you together. Like you start to understand what really goes on and understand the value of both like each other's opinion. And I think that's very important.
Great. Any other questions?
Sorry, go ahead. I had a question regarding disabilities. Is that just physical disabilities, or does that include the various cognitive and psychological disabilities?
I don't remember the specific verbiage, but I do know it includes physical and mental disabilities.
Like someone, okay.
Yeah, I don't remember the specific verbiage. I don't know if it covers emotional, those types of things, but I know it does cover physical and mental disabilities.
Is this the same or an extension of the program that he does with incarcerated individuals and police officers?
I know that he has a different program with them, and I don't, someone else here may know more than I do, but I know that there is an intersection at least of those two, because I know when I went through the class, and I know it hasn't changed, we would actually go out to the Valley State Prison and meet with the inmates there and have discussions with them, which was pretty enlightening. I mean, one of our officers found that it was someone he had arrested was in there, and so that's part of it. There's an intersection, but I believe it's two separate, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's two separate programs.
Yeah, he does a lot of work with incarcerated people, but yeah, as one class session of this cultural relations class is going to Valley State Prison to have a day where we interact with the inmates.
But it is two separate programs essentially.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the details of his other programs with incarcerated individuals, but that's how it crosses over with us.
Got it. I think anything that draws people to meet in the middle,
Yeah.
it's a great opportunity.
Anyone else? Okay, anybody from the audience have any questions coming up?
Thank you.
Wait, yeah, I didn't see your hand first.
I just wanted to talk about Michael Baldwin, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity that the victim's family could go in and talk to the new police officers and hear our perspective, and maybe it will make them think twice about pulling out a gun. I went with Michael Baldwin to the state prison, and I got to tell Trevor's story, and it's healing for the families as well. It's not a you're bad, what you did, or to have us fighting, but to come together and understand what's happened to our families that have lost loved ones to police or been brutalized, and work together to gap that and come together and hopefully help some new police officers to think twice before they do something that could drastically destroy a family. That's all. Thank you.
She's been fighting Travis' family. Oh, I need to make a correction. Misspoke. My wife and my grandson, not me at this time, is fighting cancer. I said I misspoke. I'm sorry. Well, I just heard some good news that we have a little academy here where a police officer can learn how to approach people of different color. Being an African American, I met a lot of people. Being community activists over 20 and maybe 30 years, that they have a chip on their back already. And that's good that we have a program to train officers to speak. I mean, learn how to approach people. So we're doing about 45 a year, looks like. It seems like this program started in 21, I think. So 80-some police officers have been through, average about 35, 40 police officers been through it. Well, 3 years? Well, I don't know much about it. I like to learn about it. And hopefully that it be successful. Because me being around a lot of Latinos, I sit on 3 boards, Latino boards. And I had to learn a lot of things on their culture. I'm talking about over probably 20 years. Walking 45 miles with the United Farm Workers. I looked around, I was a member for well over 15 years. But I'm there, and I'm glad that this is active here in Modesto. I don't know about the sheriff. If you notice back in the day, the biggest problem was the sheriff. You remember back in Mississippi, Martin Luther King, how the sheriff was the main dog, I'll say. I don't know how we can reach them and have their police officer go through some training. I think we're all one union, and being one union, we back each other and don't leave them out. Maybe the chief can send a signal to the sheriff.
Sebastian, can you wrap up your comments, please?
It's got 1 minute and 41 seconds.
No, it was
Oh, that's all.
5 minutes.
Okay, no disrespect. I'm done. I'm just happy that I hear some good news. And I just speak. I just speak open. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Let me close the public thing. Could say public comments closed. Would you like to speak on this?
I think Sebastian kind of indirectly brings up a point that when there's an encounter with a police officer, sometimes you don't know whether they're the sheriff's department or the police department. And I believe that establishing this board and all of the good programs that Chief Gillespie has established is really putting us in the right direction. And maybe the best way that we can influence the sheriff's department is by making a success out of this and what we're doing.
Okay. Next up is Lieutenant Cliver again for Racial and Identity Profiling Act.
Thank you, Chair Hahn. So I've already done the introduction, so I'll just go right into the presentation. The Racial Identity Profiling Act of 2015 was based on AB 953, which was passed in 2015, but it really got underway in 2018. And what it does is it requires all city and county and local law enforcement agencies in California, and that does include the CHP and peace officers with the Cal State and university educational institutions, to collect perceived demographic and other detailed data regarding pedestrian and traffic stops. So it created the Racial and Identity Profiling Advisory Board. And when agencies began utilizing this and collecting this data was determined by the size of the agency. Here in Modesto, we fell into the group which actually makes up the vast majority of law enforcement agencies in California, which we began in January of 2022. Larger agencies began slightly before that, but it was based on the size of your agency. So a little bit about the RIPA Advisory Board. The California DOJ, Department of Justice, the Office of the Attorney General, has the primary oversight of the RIPA Board. The RIPA Board includes 17 members that represent the public, law enforcement, and educators. I believe law enforcement has 3 individuals on the board itself. I believe 3, maybe 4. The rest are made up of community members and educators. At the direction of the state legislature, their charge is to eliminate racial and identity profiling, improve diversity, and improve racial and identity sensitivity in law enforcement throughout the state. So the function of the RIPA Advisory Board is to analyze, first of all, to analyze stop date information. So one thing I want to make very clear, because I think that there might be a general misperception within the community about RIPA. What RIPA does essentially in a nutshell, and I'll go into a lot more of this further in the presentation, but it collects all data from the state of California, and it basically puts that into one group. So it doesn't matter whether you're from San Diego, San Francisco, Tuolumne County, Redding, wherever, it's all brought in as one group of data, and they use that data to make recommendations to the legislature of the state. So they aren't coming back with when agencies give data to the RIPA board, they aren't coming back and saying, Modesto, we want you to do this. Sacramento, we want you to do this. They're saying, here's what we recommend for the state of California. Does that make sense? Okay. So they analyze the information itself, and then they publish annual reports that detail the past and current status of RIPA. They analyze law enforcement training and make policy recommendations for eliminating racial and identity profiling. They work with state and local law enforcement agencies to review and analyze policies and practices. Reports, it's here. The website can be found at the website that's listed on here. But if you just do a Google search for California RIPA, it will come up as well. So it's pretty easy to find. And just one thing to be aware of, they're basically about 1.5 years to 2 years behind on the data. So the 2024 report that has already came out, it came out in January, is an analysis of the 2022 data. So the first thing to understand is what the officers themselves have to report about themselves, because there is a requirement that officers basically create their profile, which tells about them. One thing you'll note in all of this data, whether it's from the officer or the community member who stopped, is that the name is not included. So officers' names aren't reported necessarily, although we keep track of to make sure that officers are completing RIPA, but it's not something that's reported to the state. They report their agency ORI number, which is essentially like a social security number for the police department. Every law enforcement agency in the United States has a 9-digit number that's the ORI for them. The officer's identification number, which in our case is an employee number, their number of years of experience, that includes experience both at their current agency or any law enforcement experience throughout the state, the type of assignment that they're in. And then in 2024, they added the officer's race or ethnicity. They also added the officer's gender, but that is held up in court currently. So I'm not sure where that's going to end up, but our officers at this moment aren't reporting their gender until that gets resolved. So the first thing to understand is what is a reportable stop. A reportable stop is any detention of a person by a peace officer. So a traffic stop, a subject stop of a pedestrian, a bicycle stop, those are all reportable stops. In addition to that, any detention, so if an officer goes to a call for service and they detain a person, that's also a reportable stop. If they conduct a search of a person, even if it's a consensual search based on a consensual encounter, that is also a reportable stop. So witnesses, victims, reporting parties, those types of individuals, they are not reportable stops, but any detention or search is going to bring about a reportable stop for an entry in the RIPA system. And just to make it a little more convoluted, there are times when multiple officers or sometimes officers from multiple agencies stop an individual for whatever reason. The way that RIPA explains it to our officers in the initial training is that when multiple officers from multiple agencies are involved in a stop, one reporting agency is responsible for filling out the stop data form, and only one officer from that agency submits a report. And the way that is determined is the officer with the highest level of engagement will submit a report. So that can be a little bit difficult to ascertain when you have two officers who maybe stop a person at the same time. That's where they have to make the determination on which one had the highest level of engagement. There's no necessarily black and white way to determine that. It's something the officers have to determine amongst themselves. But the report must include all actions taken, including those of other officers. So if I'm the only reporting officer, but Chief Gillespie were to have searched the individual, I'm going to report in there that Chief Gillespie searched the individual. So I'm not just reporting about myself, but about everyone that was on the stop. So here's the stop information that's collected, and it does get a little bit lengthy, but it includes the date, time, and duration of the stop, how long the individual was stopped, the location, and they do not allow a street address. So officers have to choose a block or an intersection or latitude, longitude point in there. They can't report a specific address, even if it's a business. So for example, the mall is 3401 Dale Road here in Modesto. If an officer were to make a stop there, they would have to report either the 3400 block of Dale Road, the near the intersection of Stanford and Dale, or they could use the latitude, longitude for that, but they can't use the actual address. They have to include the reason for the stop. Was it a response to a call for service? The types of actions that were taken during the stop, whether contraband or evidence was discovered, whether property was seized, what the result of the stop was, and many of these I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in a moment. Beginning in 2024, they also have to include whether it was a welfare or wellness check on an individual. And then again, beginning in 2024, if it was a proactive stop, they needed to differentiate whether it was a vehicle stop, a bicycle stop, or a pedestrian stop. They also need to include whether it was a city or unincorporated area and whether it was made at a K-12 public school. So one thing that's very interesting about this is, when we talked earlier about racial profiling, it's really about officers making decisions based on their perception, right, of a person's race or ethnicity. What RIPA does is it asks the officers to determine their perception of a person upon first contact. So they are to, on their RIPA entry form, include their perceived race or ethnicity of the person, their perceived gender for that person, their perceived sexual orientation, their perceived age, whether the person stopped has limited or no English fluency, whether it was a perceived or known disability, and beginning in 2024, also including their perception of whether or not the person was unhoused. So just to make sure we're clear on this, RIPA data isn't always going to 100% match up with actual stop data. The reason being, if an officer stops an individual, they're asked their perception of the person upon first contact on all of these categories. If an officer learns later that the person is of a different race or gender or sexual orientation or age from what they first identified when they first contacted the person, that doesn't matter. What they're to record is their initial perception of the person upon first contact. So moving beyond that, they need to include the reason for the stop. First of all, if it's a traffic violation, they'll need to enter the applicable code, the type of violation, meaning whether it was a moving violation, an equipment violation, or a non-moving violation, such as like a registration violation would be an example of that. They need to include whether if the stop was made because of reasonable suspicion that a person was engaged in criminal activity. So that include any of these categories that you see listed below. If the officer actually witnessed the commission of a crime, if the person matched a suspect description that was given to the officer, whether the suspect was in a vehicle or driving a vehicle that matched the suspect vehicle description that had been given to them, whether they were a witness or a victim identified, if a witness or a victim identified them as a suspect of a crime, if they were carrying a suspicious object, if they were performing actions indicative of casing a victim or location, if they appeared to be suspected of acting as a lookout, if their actions were indicative of a drug transaction, if their actions were indicative of engaging in a violent crime, or other reasonable suspicion for probable cause that a crime has occurred. Adding to that, other possible reasons for the stop would be probable cause to arrest or search, probable cause to take a person into custody under 5150 of the Welfare and Institutions Code, if the officer knew the person to be on parole, probation, PRCS, or other mandatory supervision, if the officer had knowledge of an outstanding arrest warrant for the wanted person, whether it was an investigation to determine whether the person is a truant, or a consensual encounter that results in a search. So the officer needs to identify which one of these last three slides was the primary reason for stopping the individual if it was a proactive stop. From there, the officers have to include the actions that they took by the end of the encounter. So non-force related actions would include the person was removed from vehicle by order, and this is one where officers have to choose all that apply. Whether a field sobriety test was conducted, whether there was a curbside detention, meaning the person was asked to sit on the curb during the investigation, whether it was a patrol car detention, whether a canine was used to search for contraband, whether the person was photographed, whether the person was asked for their parole, probation, or PRCS status, whether they were asked for consent to search the person, whether the officer conducted a frisk or pat search of the clothing, whether they actually searched the person themselves, whether they asked for consent to search property, and if there was a search of the property. So obviously there are going to be encounters or investigations where more than one of these apply. The officers have to include all of those that did apply. Here's some more non-force related actions: whether property was seized, whether the vehicle was impounded, whether a passenger in the vehicle had their name run, whether they asked for identification of a stopped person's passenger, whether there was admission or written statement obtained from a student, meaning someone under 18, or if none of the above apply. If there is a search, then the officer needs to give the basis for that search. And this could be consent given, either verbal, written, or implied by conduct, whether it was an officer safety or safety of other search, whether there was a search warrant, if it was a condition of probation, parole, PRCS, or mandatory supervision, if there was it was suspected weapons or visible contraband, an odor of contraband, canine detection, evidence of a crime, if it was a search incident to arrest, whether there was exigent circumstances, or a vehicle inventory search, which is a search that's done of a vehicle before it's impounded. If contraband or evidence is discovered, the officers need, well, whether they do or not, they need to make an entry here of all those that apply, meaning none, firearms, ammunition, weapons other than a firearm, drugs or narcotics, alcohol, money, drug paraphernalia, suspected stolen property, cell phones, electronic devices, or other contraband. If property was seized, the officers need to include the reason for that seizure, whether it was safekeeping as allowed by law or statute, if it was contraband, if it was evidence, if it was an impound of a vehicle, or if it was abandoned property. Then if property is seized, the officers need to include that. And if you've been paying attention, you'll probably notice it's very similar to the one we just did with contraband. But this includes the type of property seized. It includes the exact same list, but also includes vehicle, if a vehicle is seized. Then if there are any sort of force-related actions taken, then officers need to list this as well. This is, again, all that apply, whether the person was handcuffed, whether there were physical compliance techniques, if there was a canine removed from a patrol vehicle, even if it wasn't necessarily used, if a canine bit or held a person, if a firearm was pointed at a person, if a firearm was discharged, if it was unholstered, if an electronic control device was pointed at a person or sparked, if an electronic control device was used in dart mode, or if it was used in drive-stun mode. A continuation of that is any impact or projectile weapons pointed at a person, or if they were discharged or used, if a baton or other impact weapon was drawn or used, if chemical spray was used, if a person was removed from a vehicle by physical contact, if there was a use of a vehicle in apprehension of a stopped person, or if none of the above apply. And then finally, the officer needs to include the result of the stop, which is if there was no action taken, if it was a verbal warning, a written warning, a citation for an infraction, an infield cite and release, which is essentially a citation for a misdemeanor, if there was a custodial arrest pursuant to a warrant or without a warrant, if a field interview card was completed, or if a non-criminal transport or caretaking transport was used. Also, if the officer contacted the parent or legal guardian of a person legally responsible for the person, which would obviously be an underage person, if there was a psychiatric hold, or if the officer contacted U.S. Department of Homeland Security. So that's all the data that the officers need to include in these RIPA entries. As you can see, it's pretty thorough information. Being that this began in 2022, I have not personally made a RIPA contact because I spend most of my time behind a desk. But from talking to our officers, it typically takes, depending on the complexity of the stop, anywhere from 5 to maybe 15 to 20 minutes to complete one RIPA entry for one stop. So again, what RIPA does is they're not taking just Modesto information or Sacramento information or information from, it's taking all information from the state and putting it together into one pot, using that to make determinations for legislature. So their latest report, which includes the data for 2022, again, this is from the 2024 report, and I'm not going to go through every single list here, but this shows you residential population comparison to the actual stop data for 2022. This was based on about 4.5 million stops throughout the state in 2022. There are a couple of things that I would want to point your attention or direct your attention to, because again, as I said earlier, the officer is tasked with documenting their initial perception of a person. So when you look at this list, one thing you'll see is California residential population for 2021, 10.7% of individuals identify themselves as multiracial, whereas 0.4% identify themselves as other, something other than these categories, which makes up over 11%. But as you can see, only 1.1% of stops included multiracial individuals, and none of them included other. And that's the reason for that is the officer is tasked with looking at a person from their initial perception of the person, what their ethnicity is. And I'm extrapolating a little bit here, but I think it's probably safe to say there's very few times when an officer is going to look at a person and upon a first perception say, I think this is a multiracial person. They're identifying one race or the other. So I bring that up because that's 11% differential in the data already. So this is really the same graph, just included in different form, but I included it because it is on the RIPA website. It includes the same data as the previous graph. This is the gender of persons who are stopped. Once again, just kind of driving it home, this is based on initial perception. So about 71% of stops are made. The officer initially identifies the person as a cisgender male, 28.7% as a cisgender female. A transgender individual makes up a small number of the rest, as well as gender nonconforming. But again, if an officer stops an individual, perceives that person as a cisgender male, later finds out that they're a transgender individual, they're still reporting it as a cisgender male because that was their initial perception. And then this last graph here just shows the data for the age range. 25 to 34-year-old individuals make up the largest group here, followed by 35 to 44-year-old individuals. But it collects information from every category, including from 1 to 9-year-old up to 65 years and plus. So now, if there are any questions from the board?
Go ahead. Well, I just, every stop that an officer makes has to be filled out. This has to be filled out for?
Correct. Again, essentially every proactive stop, yes.
Yeah.
And then for a large number of the detentions that occur on calls for service as well.
That's okay.
And
That was
again,
my first question. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Is this data that the individual officer is entering, is it computer driven? They're entering it either at the station or in their computers?
That's actually a great question, because I was thinking halfway through the presentation, I should have included this. So we have an app that are on the work cell phones for officers. It's through Veritone, and the officers can use that out in the field. They can also use the Veritone website. Each officer has their own login information. So some officers, some of the older guys like me maybe don't like using their phone or app. They can go to their vehicle's computer and enter it there. There is no requirement for specifically when the data is entered, but it's generally preferred, of course, that it be entered as soon as possible, because again, you're judging based on perceptions, right? So if you stop 12 people in a day, you don't have to be going back and remembering all 12 individuals. So most of the time you're going to stop after that stop to do it.
So it's entered directly into an app that computerizes it, and then is it sent directly to the state, or does MPD collect it and send it to the state?
I think it gets collected through MPD, and then we report that information to the state. So we need to report all information by April 1st. But again, when I've looked at the data, and I believe we've even discussed a little bit over email in the past, it's not really in a very usable format, because it really requires, I don't know if it requires a computer science degree, but it requires someone who's more computer literate than I am to analyze it, right? But it comes through in one big group of data that we send to the state by April 1st.
Yeah, I found it very difficult. That's why I wanted a that's why I was interested in a presentation. But it looks like it is not stored anywhere, even at MPD. It would be in those categories that the state uses, that it wouldn't be like you could say, okay, we've had 2,000 stops during this year, and that may be just crazy off base, but you wouldn't then have a breakdown of where the stop occurred, the perceived gender, perceived race, and all of those other categories.
Right. Yeah. So there's no real user-friendly way to gather that data. We do collect, obviously, we have our own CAD data, right? That includes all of our historical stops and arrests and those types of things, which we've used to discuss, earlier on in previous presentations, right?
Yes.
But so I guess, an argument could be made either way also as to which is even more valuable, right? Because I can tell you, I spent about 13 years as a patrol officer, and the vast majority of that was spent on graveyard shift, right? There were very few times working in the graveyard shift where you stop a car and you know who's behind the wheel of that car until you actually walk up and are standing face to face with them, right? So but if, you know what I mean? So if I learn later on the person's of a different race or gender or whatever than what I initially perceived, I'm not sure which one is actually even more valuable of data. I don't know.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and I would just add that we're, RIPA is still fairly new, and it's something that when I look around, at least the county and beyond, I don't know that there's a lot of agencies that are trying to analyze themselves RIPA data. I'm sure there are a few, but not anywhere locally that I'm aware of. So it is something that we're looking at. Obviously, there's a lot of good collection data, but again, it goes straight to the state. And I've seen the raw data as well, and it's something much beyond, my expertise to try to analyze that data. So it's something that we may be looking at to educate some of our analysts to maybe try to figure out how to use that data to analyze it more. But it's not simple whatsoever. The raw data, just looking at the raw data is not going to tell you anything. So we may continue to look at it, and just like anything with data, there's pluses and minuses to it. I think Lieutenant Kleiber made some good points about some of the maybe shortcomings that this data could provide, but I'm sure there's good stuff that you can glean out of it as well. So the state obviously does an annual report, even though it's a couple of years behind in the data. And I think it's just more information for all of us to look at and assess.
No, that's, as you gave the report, it's mountains of data that's unrelated really to the ability to go back and say, you should have done something differently. It's kind of a collective, and maybe that's what it's supposed to be, but I'd be very interested in what the recommendations are. I mean, are they real things that you can actually, are they actionable recommendations, or are they just, this is what's happening out there? Because how do you translate all this data into, well, we should start doing this as a state. We should start doing that as a state, because it's all, just a whole bunch of unquantifiable data, I guess is what I'm saying.
There's a lot of data collected, obviously, and it's always a balancing act, right? Like between collecting too much to where it's too time consuming and redundant, or not collecting enough, to where you're not accurately identifying things. When it comes to the recommendations, I mean, there are dozens of recommendations on their website, but they're not directed at specific departments. Generally, they're more things like, I can tell you, for example, one recommendation they have is that municipalities don't have their own school district police departments, right? Which we don't already have. And there are several subtopics within that related to school district police departments that aren't applicable to Modesto, right? Because we don't have a school district police officer, or a police department, I should say. So things like that are included in the report that aren't really applicable, but yeah, it's mostly legislative, or a lot of it is just recommending further research.
Say it again.
A lot of it is recommending further research. We recommend that this be further analyzed or that further.
Is there a website that we could get on to look at their recommendations?
Yes, it's in the report here, but you can also, like I said, do a Google search for California RIPA board or California RIPA 2024, that type of thing.
Anybody else?
I do. More technical side. If there's an incident and we had 5 officers respond here for their department reporting, every officer has to do some level of report. Yes or no?
Talking about a report in general or for RIPA?
In general, department report.
It depends on if the officer took any action, right? So if an officer took any action, then yeah, they'll do either the report or a supplemental report. If an
Because they
officer,
were
if an officer
witnessing.
showed up and basically just stood there to see if they were needed and weren't and left, and no, they're not going to do a report.
So if you said a RIPA report could be 5 to 50 minutes. So if there was one approximately 30 minutes and one officer is doing that report, an incident that took that much time, how much more time would he need to do his department report? Or is that just impossible to guess?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but
So I'm curious how much time that one officer that's doing the RIPA report has to spend on reporting, because he also has to do his own report for the department.
it just really depends. I mean, as a patrol officer, I've had, reports that took 3 minutes, and I've had reports that took 3.5 hours if they were complex enough,
okay.
so it's difficult to say. But like I said, from talking to our officers about this, a very simple, the officer pulled the person over, spoke to them, said, hey, your taillight's out. I'm just giving you a warning today. Have a good night. Going through this information is going to take about 5 minutes. If it's a more complex stop where you had 4 people in a car and one person's on probation and 2 people were searched and the car, that type of thing, it could take 15, maybe 20 minutes to go through that. So,
Yeah. It'll be interesting when there's a point to take RIPA data and see if that shows a general trend. And then when the department's ready to track trend against that.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see if statewide, since the implementation of RIPA, has detentions and stops gone down. Because
Kind of what I'm curious.
yeah, I
about.
think
Do you
that's
see
where
trends?
it seemed like kind of maybe where you were going is, yeah, if you see a bike stop that you're going to give a ticket, but you have to spend 15 minutes doing a RIPA entry, officers may decide not to make that bike stop. So it'll be interesting to see. And I don't know that RIP has crunched any of that data, or even if there's real way to actually get some hard data around that, but I wouldn't be surprised to see if there's actually less detentions and things because of the time RIP takes.
And there is actually, now that I'm thinking about it, there is one area within the report that I saw where they're addressing specifically the Los Angeles Police Department as the only point in the report that I saw that addressed just one agency. And they talked a lot about pretext stops within that and new rules and regulations within that. And they did find that the number of stops went down pretty dramatically. I don't remember the exact number, but the number of proactive stops went down fairly dramatically.
Just to avoid doing the reporting.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's a good result.
I was more curious in the trend of the comparative for what they're asking, if they see a trend of focus from officers as more training is being given to officers over time.
Anybody else? Nico?
So that report is 223 pages long. I found it online, but yeah. So there is one graph on here that I found interesting. So I just wanted to see if maybe we can try to gather our own data for it, for Modesto Police Department. But it's about racial and ethnic disparities in search and discovery rates. I don't understand the graph completely, but it's a percentage point difference from white individuals. And it just kind of shows the search rate. Let's just say Hispanics search rate 2.5%, but the discovery rate is -4%. So I'm assuming they searched, but there was nothing found.
I'm not sure.
It doesn't really go into detail on like what that means. I might have to read like page 200, but so if we can try to look into stuff like that, like if someone gets searched and then if there's actually a discovery that was made or not, if we can get data like that.
Yeah, we'll take it under advisement. I
Yeah.
don't know that I specifically, because I don't know exactly how exhaustive that would, be for any analyst to do.
Yeah.
We could look into it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Anybody from the audience like to ask any questions or make a comment?
Real quickly, the website, the link is like backwards. It's OAG, not AOG.ca. Because I couldn't find it and then
shoot, I'm
it
sorry,
flipped.
you're
It's
right.
okay. I
Yeah.
just wanted, in
Office
case
of
anyone
Secretary
wanted to
General.
look it up, it's oag.ca.gov.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the easier way is to do a Google search. but
Yeah,
you're
that
right.
too.
All right, now we'll go to board comments and reports. Does anybody have, well, let's go through the different policy goals first. Policy goal number 8, is there any report on that?
What we were working on was sorry. What we were working or starting to look at was the forward together recommendations more closely. And as it related to use of force and what we saw, there was the pain compliance one and one other one. And we looked at MPD policy changes. There were policy changes prior to just this summer, which we had considered also. And then it just was updated July, June.
1st.
Yeah. So there are a number of the recommendations the department adopted even before we started meeting. I think Nico mentioned that in his report. And then there are some things that the department also implemented differently. So we wanted to focus a little more on being very specific about recommendations that forward together, because those groups spent a lot of time discussing this, and bring the specific, maybe prepare something where we could say, okay, these concerns that Forward Modesto brought up have been addressed by the department, or they're being addressed by the department, but we would like us as a board to discuss these other recommendations to see if we want to make any recommendations next year when we're doing our annual report. So that's kind of where we are taking things.
That's great because I was on Forward Together and we kind of had to, you know, cut off a lot of the discussion because we weren't going to be able to solve all those issues in that forum, but we were told that was going to be coming with us. So that's great that you're going through that. Okay, policy goal number 1.
On Terry there. We met about 3 weeks ago and have just started casting some email invitations out to connect with some of the people we had gathered some information from so that we can sort of shadow some of the programming we had information on. And after we do a round of out and about doing that, we'd actually like to do some follow-up with Miss Wendy down here on some of the research that you've been gathering. We see some crossovers. So I'd like to see if we can roadmap together a little bit. Yep, that's all for now.
Okay. Go ahead.
For that one, sorry, guys. For that one and to improve relations, policy goal number 1, I would like to say, to Chief Gillespie, thank you, because he is working with somebody that I know very well to improve relations amongst the African American community. And it's very much going to be one of those robust things that could be very historical for this community. And I would just like to thank you for that because that's improving relations between the African American community and the police department. And he's working with one of my high school students in order to do that. So thank you. We've met and we're going to continue to meet and produce something very much right for the community. And when it comes to a lot of these crucial conversations that need to be had. So just wanted to give you your flowers for that.
Thank you. Policy goal number 3.
We don't have anything significant to report from our last report, but I would like to know if it's possible to have Judge Ruben Villalobos come and speak at one of the meetings to talk about, from his perspective, about his ideals about reducing arrest with juveniles.
Okay. He's in charge of the care court also,
Mhm.
so that maybe we could get a little information on that also, how that's going.
Right. Mhm.
All right. Anybody have any other comments or from members? Okay.
Chair.
Yes.
I just wanted to make everybody aware that, and you may already be, I don't know, that the policy manual for MPD has been updated effective July 1st of this year. And as Nancy mentioned, some of the things that were in our annual report and some of the things that were in the Forward Together report have been addressed in that new policy manual. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, I would suggest you do that. It's, I was impressed by it.
Thank you.
Also, some of the OIR recommendations have been
Right.
incorporated.
And then lastly, if you guys don't know, there is going to be an event October 2nd with the police department and other departments from the city of Modesto. Please come out. And if you're a community police review board member, it's always good to go out and see kind of like what people are thinking and seeing what type of event is going on. It's a forum. It's going to be with the Modesto Police Department and other departments from the city of Modesto, and it'd be good to have a representative go there. I believe it's at the St. Pentecostal Church. Yeah, it's on I want to say it's Oakdale Road. Yeah, so make sure you're coming out to that October 2nd. Yes, and yes, I'll email it over to you guys. I have the flyer, and I believe Chief Gillespie can pass on the flyer too.
Right, great. So our next meeting is going to be in November, and it's going to be a workshop on collective bargaining. So look forward to seeing you all then. Meeting's adjourned.